Ready? Okay. So last week we ran out of road. We were discussing Ruach Hakodesh. We ran out of road, so I want to pick up where we left off. Now, I want to talk about the more practical type of Ruach Hakodesh. Like, Nevi'im were famous for being able to know what was lost, what was hidden in your closet. A Navi was able to see things that would be impossible for him to know otherwise. Now, last week we spoke about Ruach HaKodesh, which we were talking about Ruach HaKodesh in particular, the type of like siyata d'shmaya in getting to the truth and learning. This week I want to talk about Ruach HaKodesh that's more al derech nevuah, like Ruach HaKodesh knowing things that are impossible for someone to know without having a special gilui. Now, in particular, there's the sugya of Agunah was gebenched with many stories of Ruach HaKodesh playing a role. I want to cherry pick a few different ones and use them as the jumping off point, and then we'll discuss the concept like, more b'shleimus. So now, let me start like this. There's a Gemara in Baba Basra on Daf Kuf Chaf Beis that says, Masiyin al pi baskal. It's the sugya of Agunah. It's the sugya of someone who we're not sure. The husband disappeared. We're not sure where the husband went. We don't know what the status of the wife is. The Mishnah says, Masiyin al pi baskal. You could get married al pi baskal. Now, there's a machlekes in the Achronim, what exactly that means. What does a baskal mean in that Mishnah? Doesn't mean a baskal like in the rest of Shas, like a voice rings out from Shemayim. Doesn't mean that a person was standing off to the side and shouted something out and we didn't know exactly what he said. But the updated version of baskal would be to include Ruach HaKodesh in the heter of an Agunah. Now, that is something that early Chassidish rabbis excelled at. Let's just say it like that. There's probably dozens of cases where different rabbis were seimach on Ruach HaKodesh in order to be mater on an Agunah. Now, Agunas, we know, is some of the most heavy-hitting, hardest shilas that a paisik can have to deal with. Some of the, the way a paisik makes his bones. I mean, like the real bona fides of a paisik is what he could do with Agunas. Could he write a kuntris on Agunas? Could he be mater Agunas? That's really like where you separate the men from the boys. And amongst the early rabbis, there are maybe tens, probably more stories of shilas about Agunas, shver shilas about Agunas, where a rebbe interceded with Ruach HaKodesh. Now, some of them are just legends, and some of them are actually documented more in like chuvas and actual stories that are easier to find and discuss. So now I want to talk about two early great rabbis and their, injection of Ruach HaKodesh into the sugya of Agunas and how that played out a little bit, and then this is the practical type of Ruach HaKodesh that we're discussing. So now, let's start with the Rabbi Isaac Kalava. For anybody who knows a little Chassidish history, Rabbi Isaac Kalava is the first Hungarian Rebbe. He's today a ton of Chassidim are Hungarians. He's the first Hungarian Rebbe. He started Chassidus in Hungary. He was a Talmud of the Mizrach Magid, a Talmud maybe even of the Baal Shem Tov for a little. I'm not sure, but he was a Talmud of the Mizrach Magid for sure. He's famous for his songs that are in Hungarian. Sala Kakashmar, he has a song called Galus Galus, which has Hungarian lyrics. He was, it seems, a duck farmer as a young boy, as a teenager. These are the songs that he picked up, like from farmers, that he was Hakodesh, that he brought into the canon of Jewish song. How exactly he was exposed to Hasidus is like a story farzich, because where he lived in Hungary, there was no Hasidim at that time. He lived in the 1700s. He's like a very early Chassidish Rebbe. There's no Hasidim. One of the legends has it that Reb Leib Saris was one of the early Hasidim, had a dream that there was a neshama kadesha that was born in Kalev that needed to be brought to the Chassidim, and he traveled there, and he found the Isaac Kalev, who was a yasim according to this version, who was 11 years old and was alone, herding ducks in the field. And he convinced his mother to allow him to take him to Shmelk of Nikolsburg to learn there, and from there he went to the Maggid of Mizrich, and from there he became a Grace Rebbe, moved back to Hungary, and from there he had Talmidim, and Hungary became a real place for Chassidim to live. That's one version of the story. Other versions are that he was not a Yasim. He had a decent home, but at some point he became unsatisfied with what he had, and he traveled on the road. He found Shmelk, and from similarly, in some way or another, Isaac Kalava became exposed to Chassidus and became the first Rebbe in Hungary. Now, there's no halachas farm from Isaac Kalava. He didn't leave over any halachas farm, but there's one that's a legend and one that's more mefurish of his interjection into big Agunah shilas, Pashas al pi Ruach HaKodesh. One that's a legend is that this I've seen, the Kleisberger Rebbe writes about it, the Satmar Rebbe wrote about it, many, Hungarian Rebbes wrote about this. This was a known thing in Hungary, that Rabbi Isaac Kalava, there was once a shilah with an Agunah, and no one could come to figure out, how to be makel, what to do. And Rabbi Isaac Kalava, they went to ask him, and he said, I see Ruach HaKodesh that this husband is gone, he's dead, and this woman is mutter linase. She's mutter to get married. Now this kicked up a big firestorm. There was many poskim who wrote Hayitachin to be Semech on Ruach Hakodesh. How could he say something like that? Back and forth. Some Seif, I don't know what the Seif Hadavar is, but all the Rebbes, the like close to Heintige Rebbes who write about it, like the Kloisenberger, the Satmar, or whatever they write about it, they say the whole thing was a Tayis because Me'ikar Din, this lady was mutter anyhow. There was really Stadim Lahalacha to be matir. And it was just like Yehuda Va'oid to be Moisif, an extra svara that Rabbi Isaac Kalaver was being Seimach on Ruach HaKodesh. It wasn't really about Ruach HaKodesh. Now that's the legendary part, and that's a kula based on Ruach HaKodesh. Now there's something that's more written down, that's a chumrah that might be Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh in the Sugi of Agunas. And that is like this. There's a sefer called Igeras Seifrim. It's letters from the Eger Sefer family that was put out by a third or fourth generation. The Chasam Sefer's Einikel, I think, put it out. And it's letters from Rabbi Kiva Eger, the Chasam Sefer, the Ksav Sefer, some from Rabbi Shlomo Eger. Anyone from that family's letters are in there. And in the letters from the Chasam Sefer, in Tshuva Mem, the title is as follows: Michtav Teichacha L'Rav Meforsim Sheroitze La'agin Isha Achas Neged Ahetem Mikama Gainim. Michtav to a Rav Meforsim, a well-known Rav, who wants to be Ma'agin Isha, not allow her to get married, Keneged the psak of many Rabbanim. Now it's addressed Hachayim Vashalom Yachtav Yutam Tuhu to Marina Rabbeinu of Isaac of Caliph v'Hagalil. That's who it's addressed to. The Chasam Sefer wrote a letter to Rabbi Isaac Kalaver about an Agunah Shaila, and he writes, several years ago, the Chasam Sefer writes, several years ago, a Shaila came to me about an Agunah, and I had a Psa Einfall, a way to be Mekel. Right, so I didn't want to be Semech on this on my own, but then over time, I spoke to other Gedolim, I spoke to Reb Ephraim Zalman Margolius, and he was maskim to it, and I spoke to others, and it became clear to me that this is a svarat that one could use to be Mekel on. He doesn't say what it is in Agunas. Now he says, I was always afraid, I'm afraid, Reb Ephraim Zalman, fine. Then he says, my Talmud, who you know, who's obviously someone who lived in the area of Isaac Kalaver, had a Shaila with an Agunah, and he was Seimech on this kula that he heard from me and that he heard from Ephraim Zalman Margolius. He says, Milvad Prishusay, Tzidkasay, Tumasay, Yeshrasay, Milvad, the fact that my Talmud is a grace, tzaddik and a good guy, he's a Rav Gadol B'Tayr, B'frat Ben Yanei Agunah, it's B'frat in the Sugi of Agunas, he's a big expert. Shekvar Yatzal L'Menatim Ba'ilum B'Sifra Shechib Ben Yanei Agunah, he wrote a sefer on Agunas. And Mela, you should be able to be Seimach in his kula. V'alzen Nasa Maise Bezdin, V'nisas L'Bai L'Shein Al Pitamid Chacham Manal. And based on my Talmud and these other psakim, this woman was able to get married to her second husband, based on this psak. Now he says, comes along, V'Shamati, he says, and here's where it gets dicey. It says, Shamati ki pe'er rum ma'lasai, which is a very nice title. There's no disrespect in this letter. It's just ki pe'er rum ma'lasai, oid machzik betumasai v'chasidusai, is being machzik in your tmimistikait and your chasidus, lahachmesh alelitin makam lazog lashav lashavas be'ir luk, asher otachas v'mshaltei. Vice is the town where these people were from was under the Rabbi Zechel Kalaver's, dominion or control, and you're not allowing this couple to come back because you're saying this is not a het you can be semechan. Now he says, Ha'emes, lule that my Talmud siperli, mishvachim v'tzidkasei de pe'er rum alasei. If not for the fact that my Talmud told me that you, Rabbi Zechel Kalaver, are a good guy, lule kain hayamakim dat chas v'shalom. That's what I read. Lule kain, I would go all out. Like if not that I heard that you're a tzaddik, this is, chas v'shalom. Av mikol makim hatmi in his gava. It doesn't resolve the fact that it's a tremendous plea of what you're doing. What did you see to be ma'agin a woman with what you're doing? Bi'ad chazaka. And he says, if something's wrong with the svara that I'm saying or the halacha that my Talmud is saying, so please write to me and I'll be maskim. Of course, I'll be maida ala emes. Of course, I'll be maida ala emes. But if you have no real bikoret to say on my tshuva halacha, which is mashma the Chasam Sefer knew he didn't have anything that he had actually wrong with the tshuva halacha, then I don't understand what you're doing over here, and then I'm strongly suggesting that you stop. This is what the Chasam Sefer's letter is. Now, so what is the story? What's going on over here? So now, over here, there's an interesting thing that I found that puts it into context and shows what was going on over here. There's the Minchas Elazar, the Munkacher Rebbe, was a real Hungarian Rebbe. The Minchas Elazar writes, he hated this sefer, Igeras Sefer. He held that it was full of frauds and forgeries and was made up. Now, Pashas it's not. A lot of it's Kisvei Yadis. A lot of it has, even Kisvei Yadis for it. But the Minchas Elazar didn't like it. And one thing, in Mukei Arachayim, on Hilchos Shabbos, when he's talking about Heter Mechiras, for I guess, today it's most known for nursing homes, but back in that day, Heter Mechiras was mostly known for Bruheisen, for beer houses. You had to serve the Goyim on Shabbos and Yom Tif, and you needed a Heter Mechira. So Rabbi Kveger, there's a shaila in the Paiskim of Heter Mechira. The Rechaim, the Tzanzirov, made Heter Mechira. His son, the Shinava, came along and was very against it. and then the Minchas Lazar was very against it. Now in Igera Seifrim, in the Sefer, it brings a letter, a Ksav Yad, the Rebbe Kiveger writing a Het Mechira for someone who owned the brew house. Now Rebbe Kiveger writing a Het Mechira with his own Ksav Yad is kind of like that's a checkmate. You know what I'm saying? That means that you could do it. It means it might not be great, it might be Makam Lahachma, it means you could do it. You can't say you can't do it. So Minchas Lazar deals with this by saying that the Sefer is full of forgeries. I don't like the Sefer. He probably made up half the things. And he goes on to bring a bunch of examples of things that he doesn't like, different letters that he doesn't like in Igera Seifrim. Now after a few of them, he goes to 2-3 of them. This is one that he gets to. He says, V'oid bin Aksavim, I found, allegedly to the Chasam Sefer, writing to the Hagoyin Hakodesh Mikalev. Now here, listen to the description of the Kalev Rav, a real Chassidish description. He says, Ashar Meforsim, he was Meforsim to be a Greisa Mensch, V'ad hayoyim muchzik be'emes b'piris Rabbi Seinu v'Aviseinu z'chus yagen aleinu. Till now, it's Meforsim from our Avis and our Rebbeim, l'Baal Ruach HaKodesh Neira, that he was a tremendous Baal Ruach HaKodesh. Madreges neflois b'terasi v'avidasai, v'atznei alechas v'seisur b'galoi, li midasas g'day le'achsidis tamidei chachamim v'hakim v'kubalim g'daylim v'evdei Hashem be'emes m'siris nefesh. Fine, he hanoyedim oz b'Hungarian ha'yeshana. He brought Chasidus and taught everybody in Hungary, he says. Umimenu yachad mimenu pina hasyastas achsidus v'emuna. He stelled weg like a corner, a winkel for Chassidus in Hungary. Asher lamim pirashke b'hagish alikim kadosh hagoyin Reb Shmelka Horowitz. He learned from Reb Shmelka of Nicholsburg. Fine. Now here's the thing. He says mekublani asher shamu magidei emes. I heard from Grace mention who said over the true things. He says mibal devrei chaim, in the name of devrei chaim sha'amar ki shloisha parsoyis sviv ha'ir kalev. Within 3 kilometers around Kalev, still today, he's writing 100 years later. Kedushas Hagoyin HaKadosh, I'm sorry, Ki Shleisha Parsai Sivir HaKalev, Gam Ad Hayoim, Margishim Kedushas Hagoyin HaKadosh, Merav Yitzchak Isaac Mikalev. If someone steps into like the exclusion zone of Kalev, the 3 kilometers around Kalev, they could feel the Kedusha of Rav Isaac Kalev. Umakim Menuchas Kedushas Hatzion Shaloim by his kever. Fine. This is his haskama to Rav Isaac Kalev. He was a Baal Ruach HaKodesh Neira. He was known to be a Baal Ruach HaKodesh Neira. And Grace Rebbe said that if you step into 3 kilometers around Kalev, you could still feel his Kedusha. Now, says he, I found this very strange letter that someone put there, b'chutzpah, l'shoni lahatfis b'zeh lashon. The grace of chutzpah that he put there to be matfis in such a lashon, michtav teichacha l'rav meforsim, ad kan l'shoni. He says, I was, taken aback and then totally overwhelmed with horror when I saw this. Anybody who believes in the kedusha of the Baal Shem Tov and his talmidim and his talmidim, Asher Hagoyin HaKadosh Mikalev b'seichemu, and it's written over there, Michtav Teichacha, and etc. How could it be such a thing? And then he continues on. He says, Elamai, this letter has to be false. It's missing something. Something's not right in it, and fine. That's his piece. Then he continues and he says, one second, I lost my place here. He continues and he says like this. He says, Umanda Amar. He says, someone who would come and say, Shirah Hagoyin HaKadosh Mikalev B'Ruach HaKodesh, that the Kalev Rav saw B'Ruach HaKodesh, Shekol Eila Apalpulim V'Svaris, Mikol Makim, Baila Adayin Uchai, Gamkein Le Mishtabish. If someone was to look at this tshuva and say what was going on over here was that the Kalev, Rav Isaac Kalev, saw the Chasam Sefer tshuva, saw all the Svaris, and said, I hear you, it's all good lahalacha, but B'Ruach HaKodesh, I see that this husband is still alive, he wouldn't be saying something wrong. That's probably what happened, he says. Fine, this is, he continues on, he says that the area was an area that had tremendous problems with arayas, and there was a need for chumrah, and etc. So here you have a case where you have the Chasam Sefer and others writing to Rabbi Isaac Kalev not to be machmar and Agunah, connected what they held to be the psak halacha, and you have the Minchas Elazar coming and saying, no, Rabbi Isaac Kalev must have saw Ruach HaKodesh that the husband was still alive. So you have this mamash from both ends. You have a story with a kula, where he's being makel based on Ruach HaKodesh that the husband is dead, and then you have a story of a chumrah, where he's being machmer based on Ruach HaKodesh that the husband was alive. Both of them connected the psak, so to speak, meaning both of them connected the normative psak, what the Paiskim at the time were saying, with Ruach HaKodesh. Now, this is like a fascinating type of thing, because you have over here, first of all, the practical type of Ruach HaKodesh, meaning he saw Ruach HaKodesh that the husband was alive and the husband was dead. It's a very practical type of Ruach HaKodesh that's being discussed over here, and you have that it's mamash coming into conflict with actual psak. So, Lafuke last week when we talked about Ruach HaKodesh being used to align a person's seichel where he couldn't achieve on his own, to align it with psak. Over here you have the exact opposite. You have practical Ruach HaKodesh, meaning seeing something physical, being used to say you could be in this alignment with the actual halacha. Now, this is like a very fascinating type of Ruach HaKodesh to use. This is a whole different world of Ruach HaKodesh. Now, there's many, many more stories of this. Another one who was very famous for this was the Hakodesh Magid is very famous for Ruach HaKodesh and Agunah. I don't want to spend all our time on stories, so I'm going to have to move on to the actual discussion of how this works. If we have more time, I'll come back to the Hakodesh Magid. Now, so what is this type of Ruach HaKodesh? What's going on over here? So now, as follows. There is a Gemara in Eruvin, a fascinating Gemara in Eruvin. The Gemara in Eruvin of Samach Daled Amud Beis tells a story. It says I think it was Rav Gamliel, was traveling on the way with Rav Eloi. He was walking along a road, and on the side of the road they found a loaf of bread. So it says Rav Gamliel tells him, Eloi, pick up the bread. Rav Eloi picks up the bread. A few miles down the road, they bump into a guy, and Rav Gamliel tells Rav Eloi, he tells the guy, he says, Mavgai, I think that was his name, Mavgai, take this bread from Rav Eloi, and you can have it back. So Rav Eloi was taken aback, and Rav Eloi, after Rav Gamliel passed by, he asks this guy, did Rav Gamliel ever meet you before? Did Rav Gamliel know you? He says, no, I never saw this guy in my life. He says, and what's your name? Mavgai. He says, so how does he know it? So the Gemara says, Ba'isha Gimel Dvarim took place. Nizrika by Ruach HaKodesh. Rav Gamliel was had Ruach HaKodesh pop into his mouth, because he just knew this guy's name without ever meeting him. We learned two different dinim. Ein mavir and alapas. You're not allowed to leave bread on the floor. And we learned a second din about the bread from Nevi Tichav and Legave Pesach. These are the three dinim that come into this Gemara. So now over here in this Gemara, you have this type of Ruach HaKodesh that I think we're familiar to think about. Like this Ruach HaKodesh, Rav Gamliel just had no knowledge of something, and just the words that came out of his mouth were factual for something he could never have known. That's this type of Ruach HaKodesh that we're describing, for just knowing something. Now, so here you have an example in the Gemara of such a thing. Now, so let's fast forward to our times. So the Rav Chaim Kanievsky in Archas Yosher, in Simon Chavav, he actually does a big collection of this. Now it's a mix of things, because some of them have nothing to do with Ruach HaKodesh, but in the beginning he starts like this. He brings all the Gemaras that talk about Ruach HaKodesh. Obviously, this Gemara in Eruvin with Gamliel, Ruach HaKodesh brings in a Gemara in Adarim that says Safar, Rav Akiva, Ruach HaKodesh. Now some of them are more learning related. The way we split it up, not all of them are relevant to our discussion. Some of them are learning related, some of them are practical related. But this Rav Gamliel he brings. Then he says, V'gam b'deiros ha'achronim, even in recent generations and later generations, Yeduim kama dvarim, there was things that were known, Kigoin mehagra, Merabbeinu Chavetz Chaim Zal, V'oid harbe gedolim, Masha amru dvarim b'lishi yoidim em klal. They would say things that they had no knowledge about, V'akol neskayim. V'gamrinu harbe dvarim kelim Rabbeinu Zecharinim V'rachu. Pashas in his mind means the Chazanish. When Chaim says, the probably means the Chazanish. He says, we saw many things like this from Rabbeinu, that they would just say things that they had no knowledge of. He says, V'tzarach le'em sheyesh harbe madregis b'Ruach HaKodesh. There must be that there are many madregis in Ruach HaKodesh. The Masha Amru b'Gemara, the Gemara that we started with last week, Nostalgia Ruach HaKodesh from Yisrael, the Gemara Baba Basra that says that the Ruach HaKodesh was Nostalgia from Yisrael, Hakavana al Nevuah Mamish, Shezen Ishtalak Hatshiyav Eliyahu. That means Nevuah Mamish. That was put away until Eliyahu Navi comes. Kosh Amra Navi Achron, Zichru Teres Moshe, Hine Enechi Shalech Lechem Es Eliyahu Navi L'fnei Bayim Hashem. That's what the Pasuk in Malachi says. Hashem told Malachi, I'm going to send Eliyahu eventually. He says, V'hainu Sheme'ata Lo Yehi Nevuah, Rak B'Torah Timtzu Hakol. Now here I think is a very big punchline that we'll circle back to. It says there's not going to be any more Nevuah. Rak B'Torah, in the Torah Timtzu Hakol. You'll find everything. So now right over here, I think Rav Chaim in the line over here is already starting to lay the groundwork of where the koyach of practical Ruach HaKodesh comes from. Meaning where the strength, where the makar of practical Ruach HaKodesh comes from. Now Rav Chaim says this, and then he continues on to other things like Stam Tzadik Gezer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim, and the Emunah and Tzadikim, and other things that he continues on into here. But he's writing that by him it's a Pasha Azach, that whatever the Gemara of the Gamliel, with Rav Gamliel, could easily be applied to modern day times. Now, so how does one get Ruach HaKodesh? Meaning, so what is anybody, everybody, some people, only Chassidim, only Svardim, only Chavetz Chaim, who gets Ruach HaKodesh? How does it work? If we're saying that the Gemara and it could apply, so then when, how does it fit in? So I want to open with a line from the Chassam Sofer. So Chassam Sofer said, and this is something that resonates with me personally, and I think Rav Chaim's alluding to it as well. The Chassam Sofer said, by mir is a zicher. By me, I'm certain that any of us in Ishkim Baki and Chas and Paiskim can Hashem can Ruach HaKodesh. This is what the Chassam Sofer said. It's his Talmidim in many different places write this over in his name. Sofer writes, by me it's Pashit, that someone who's not a Baki and Chas and Paiskim cannot have Ruach HaKodesh. Now, I think that essentially Rav Chaim's alluding to that also. The Chachma is all from the Torah, and I think really if you look at it, the Gemara Baba Basra and Dafid Beis that we started with also says it. The Gemara says that when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Mishabat L'Neviim Achronim, so Nitl L'Nevuah, but Nitlu L'Chachamim. Now Chachamim means Chachmei HaTorah. like the Gemara goes on to say. We're talking about like a later Amir would say something from Rakiva or etc. So the Gemara really Mabasir Minei Bey kind of says that the Nevuah was given l'chachamim, which means chachmei atayra. So essentially this should be kind of basic. Now there is of course the other type of Nevuah that's nitnu l'ktanim l'shaitim, that ktanim l'shaitim, but as I saw, I think also from Sefer, lav kol echad yachol lital es Hashem. You can't just claim to be a shaita. You have to be a certified shaita, meaning there's rules for shaita. There's many Gemaras, all of a shas, that say what's considered a shaita. There's dinim about shaita. There's Gemara in Chagiga, there's Gemara in Yevamis. There's many dinim of what's considered a shaita. Actually, in every chelik of Shulchan Aruch, it's brought down who's considered a shaita, because there's nafka minas l'alacha. So you can't just come and claim, ich bin a shaita, now I'm Baal Ruach HaKodesh. You have to actually be a shaita to have that type of Ruach HaKodesh. So let's talk about the Torah Ruach HaKodesh. So now, the thing is as follows. There are midrashim and different chazals that a mashma, that a person can have Ruach HaKodesh, even like mamish, a pasha person, a basic person, someone who's not on such a high level. And I'll give you some examples. There's a Gemara, they're all midrashim. There's a medrash that says, if a person's an anav, l'mashal, I think I forgot where it is, it's a ton of the Beilio, I think. The medrash says if a person's an anav, with anava he's zeichet to Ruach HaKodesh, for example. There's another famous medrash, and this is a ton of Beilio, and this is something that's discussed in detail. It says as follows, Devaira, it says, Devaira was a Neviah, right? We know Devaira was a Neviah. Now, Devaira, the pasuk describes her, Devaira Eshes Lapidus. That's what she was called, the wife of Lapidus. The Tana Devailio expounds, and then it says, why was she called Eshes Lapidus? What is that title? It says her husband was a wick, their family business was wick making. They would make wicks, that's what they would do. And one time Lapidus said, let me go up to the Mishkan, and I'll bring wicks to the Mishkan that they could light from. And Devaira was there, and she said, if you're going to bring wicks to the Mikdash, let's at least make them very thick and beautiful wicks, so they could light well and strong and go for a long time. And together they sat down and they rolled these beautiful wicks that were stronger, and she sent them up with her husband to the Mishkan. So it says the Medrash, Mikan, she was zeichet to Nevuah. Because Ayoshi was mechavev this mitzvah of making thick wicks to be mechavev the mitzvah, she was zeichet to Nevuah. And says the Medrash, Nevuah is not given, not the specific yachs, it doesn't have to do with yichos, it doesn't have to do with who you come from. Nevuah can be given to anybody, bein ish, bein isha, bein zaken, bein katan, bein thing. It just has to do with shleimus ha-mitzvahs. This is what the Tana B'Leo says. So from there, l'chayr is seemingly like a makar, that Ruach HaKodesh is not so connected to Torah. Ruach HaKodesh could be having for other reasons. Now, even more explicitly than this, Rav Chaim Vital in Shari Kedusha, and this is way above my pay grade, I'm not going to go into this, but in Shari Kedusha he writes about how a person can be zeichet to Ruach HaKodesh. And he writes off, I'll read the first one. He starts off, he says, Haderech HaMuvcher, the best way shebekulamu, mashakasu b'shem Tana Develio, the Haderech shenagu b'yachsidim ha'prushim ha'kadmayim, v'ulashi b'tshuva atzum m'chal she'kilkul. A person has to be shaved b'tshuva from everything he did wrong. V'achich chayashlam nafshe b'ki mitzvahs aseh. He should be mekayim all mitzvahs aseh, b'kavanas tefilase b'tachlis, u'be'esek ha'teru l'shma b'zrizas, and being esek ha'teru l'shma and with zrizas, kishar la'oil, like a shar who is willing to go under the oil, ad yutash koich, until pasha he's out of strength. Ubemiyah tanugim v'achila v'shtiya, with minimizing tanugim and achila and shtiya. Ubekima chatzais laila ipachas mat, getting up a chatzais or a little less than that. Ubarachakas kol amidas amagunas, of apprecious mikaladim, staying away from all people. Afila bin insicha b'teila, even just am shmuzerai. V'achakach yitar gufi b'tfila tamid. V'achakach yizvar li'itim v'yachshav b'yiras Hashem v'yasim ha'avayil l'negadein of tamid v'yizarlis machshavase pnui mikol havlei olam. His mind should be clear of any of the havlei olam. So this Rav Chaim Vital is like an arichas, quite a chore, meaning not something that could be easily attained. This Rav Chaim Vital starts off Hamuvcher Shvem. This is the proper Ruach HaKodesh. But then, if you read more, he continues and he goes on to 4 other sub levels of Ruach HaKodesh, which are much lower. The Gilo is much lower, but also the level is much lower. Someone who's mashlam a mitzvah b'shleimusa or something like this. He has different levels of lower levels that more seem like they have to do with anava or shleimus ha-mitzvahs or any one of these other things, not as shleimustik as he's describing over here. So seemingly, we have, so to speak, I would say we have the basic sources that seem to imply that it has to do with Torah, meaning someone who's not shalim b'Torah is not going to have Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh comes from the Torah. It's fakir, like the Gemara Mabasa says, it's chachmas ha-Torah that's personified in a person. Mitzat Sheni, you have these different midrashim and these different implications that sound like Ruach HaKodesh could be attained in somewhat of an easier level, in a more basic level. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the most basic and famous yisaid for Ruach HaKodesh comes from the famous, it's brought down in a Mishnah and Saita, but really it's a brisa that got added on later. It's a brisa, it's brought down in Yerushalmi, it's brought down all over. It's famous, the Mesilas Yesharim is based on it. It says, Pinchas ben Yair Omer, Zrizas mevil de Nikias, Nikias mevil de Tyra, Tyra mevil de Precious, Precious de Kedusha, Ketusha de Anava, Anav Mevil de Yerschet, Yerschet Mevil de Chassidus, Chassidus Mevil de Ruach HaKodesh. Like in the whole ladder of Ruchnius, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, in that ladder there, on a very high level, puts in Ruach HaKodesh. Now, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair is much more done to the way Rav Chaim Vital that we just read that describes high-level Ruach HaKodesh, which is, it's a life's work. It's a shleimus of a whole life. Now, what do we do with Kilu, this stira of sometimes you see Ruach HaKodesh being given out to, so to speak, simpletons, and sometimes it seems like the level to get Ruach HaKodesh is very, very, very high. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, in the end of his Sefer Tamim Tia, and today it's published in Vayesh Vayam also, he has the most mefurish shaila about this. I'll read from him. His shaila is as follows. He says he's written by people, Nimtza Bizurenu, there's someone in our area, he says, Ish Asher Rabim Meshachrim Lepischei. Many people go to his door. Umeishiv L'shailas Binyanim Gluyim V'Nistarim. He answers questions about things that nobody knows the answers to, hidden and secret things. He gets it right. This guy, somehow he gets it right, he says. But, this is the Shaila writing, the guy who everyone's asking their questions to, when they're getting their Ruach HaKodesh from, is an Amaretz Gomer. He tries to keep mitzvahs to the best of his knowledge, but he's not always so great at it because he's an Amaretz. But umeachar v'nahar machar of gam b'nei Torah, even b'nei Torah go there. No yishivenu das Torah mevueres v'nemekas v'nemakaris. Please give us the whole background as to when Ruach HaKodesh, who could have Ruach HaKodesh. Does this make sense that an Amaretz could have Ruach HaKodesh? Now the tshuva is too long to read every single piece of it, but he starts with the basic sources that Ruach HaKodesh needs Torah and needs shleimus hamitzvahs and needs shleimus in order to have Ruach HaKodesh. Then he continues on to the Tana de Belio and even the Chaim Vital that seem to imply that you can have Ruach HaKodesh even for lesser causes. Now he brings from many, many different Kisvei Arizal and Chaim Vital and etc. to Vaiz that there's two types of Ruach HaKodesh that's being discussed over here. First of all, he says, interesting theory, interesting Nakuda that he says. He says the Ruach HaKodesh that's being discussed at the lower levels doesn't mean Ruach HaKodesh to have knowledge of things that are secret, Ruach HaKodesh that we're discussing. He says Ruach HaKodesh in that context means if a person does a mitzvah b'shleimus, and this is many sources for, a person does a mitzvah b'shleimus or is mashlam a certain midah b'shleimus, he has a certain psichas halev. There's it's an opportunity for an opening. Meaning, sometimes you have to work very hard to get an opening, to achieve dargis and ruchnias, to get to the next level. He says, but sometimes if a person is zeicha to be mashlam a mitzvah b'shleimus, he does something well, something perfectly, it gives a psichas halev, which allows him to catapult him to the next level. It opens him up to the next level. And he brings many makaris that Ruach HaKodesh that's being discussed doesn't mean Ruach HaKodesh, like Ruach HaKodesh knowledge of things. It means Ruach HaKodesh that Ruach HaKodesh, like Hashem gives you a certain siyata d'shmaya to catapult a person to the next level. So he says there's two types of Ruach HaKodesh that are being discussed over here. There's Ruach HaKodesh, which is knowledge of things that a person could have no knowledge of, like Rav Gamliel from the Gemara, Rav Chaim's writing about the Chazon Ish, and Rav Chaim's writing about the Chofetz Chaim and the Goyin, and Rav Isaac Kalaver, and all these different examples. That's Ruach HaKodesh that relies on real shleimus. A person has to put a life's work to real shleimus, and like the Sefer says, it's pashut by mir that someone can't have Ruach HaKodesh if he's not a baki in Shas Pesachim. And then there's a whole different type of Ruach HaKodesh that's being discussed that really just means a psichas halev, an ability to springboard, to get to the next level, to get to the next stage. That's the Ruach HaKodesh that a person could achieve through shleimus hamitzvahs and through other things. So l'chayra, there is no stira between these two different versions. There is no machlekes. There's Ruach HaKodesh l'chod, Ruach HaKodesh l'chod. There's two different kinds of Ruach HaKodesh that are being discussed over here that are so to speak available for people to have from. Now, if anyone wants, I could give you the Marmakum. The tshuva is a long tshuva. It reads easy, but it's an interesting tshuva. In any case, I think we'll hold Ruach HaKodesh over here, and next week we'll move on to Chalemus. Chalemus is itself a whole other type of interesting discussion. We'll get there.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.